Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Well, why can't our product owner limit the number of epics in progress? We identified this as a key issue in so many retros. And he still keeps adding stuff, opening up new fronts, and we starting things, we never finish things. Why? I don't understand. My software developer just refuses to get involved in anything that comes after coding. No code review, no testing, nothing. We talked with him multiple times. He just doesn't do it. I don't understand. How come our QA is completely unwilling to get involved in anything other than testing by acceptance criteria at the end of a user story? No involvement in the refinements, no co-creating acceptance criteria, nothing. Only at the end, only the testing. We need them to get involved earlier. The team wants them to get involved earlier. They want the feedback. They want to improve. But they can't. They don't. Sound familiar? Well, those are situations that I faced several times. And the classical solution that we're told or that is used is, well, tell them what to do. Tell them they have to do it. That's the classical pressure through hierarchy. And there's a reason for this. This strategy has worked for thousands of years for manual labor. Well, nowadays, especially in software areas, but in general, in knowledge work, we don't need that manual labor. We need people to actually get thinking, get involved. And this is now tricky because what this leads to is silent quitting. And that term has been used quite a lot recently, so I'm pretty sure you're familiar. There's another term that has come up. Maybe not all of you know it. It's malicious compliance. Anyone heard malicious compliance? Great way to spend your time on Reddit, just saying. But the idea is, for those of you that do not know, you follow the instructions that are given to you to the letter. To the very letter. Turns out, 99% of instructions, if you do follow them to the letter, are completely against what you want them to be. So it's the malicious compliance that is the end result. So if I can't tell people what to do, because it'll make things worse, what other choice do I have? Well, I've already brought it up with them once, maybe twice, but it didn't work, didn't stick. So what am I to do? Repeat it another 5 times? Like that's going to do anything? So there's one other strategy that I would like to show to you, that it's something that has worked for me, and it's not the only strategy. In fact, we've had several strategies that were hidden in several of the talks. And my strategy adds very well to those other strategies. So, which is why I wanted to present it to you, because it's, I think, something that several people of you probably do subconsciously, but probably not many people do consciously. And I've only realized it because it was what I was doing, but I didn't really know what I was doing. It just worked somehow for me. Eventually. It didn't work in the beginning for me. So let's quickly unlock this again. And with those words, I would like to welcome you to my talk, From Hierarchy to high performance, the power of peer accountability. And the peer accountability part is really the important thing here. But I'm not going to talk about it in the next 10, 15 minutes. I promise we'll get to it, but I need to explain some foundations to get there. So please stick with me. I know it's in the title. We'll get there. The first thing we have to understand and do is understand people's personal identity. Who are they? And I'll use some examples throughout my talk, and I'll use the examples that made it clear to me what the step was, because I think they're probably the most helpful to you. And I will start with an example of a software developer. I promise to all software developers in the room, this is the only example. Product owners and QAs also get their part. But this part is really a software developer that made it clear to me what was happening. And it's basically the example that I brought up in the beginning, the question of we had a very brilliant coder in a team that I was working with. And thing is, he was really the go-to person if we had any large challenge in our architecture. And the sad thing was that he completely refused to get involved in anything that happened after he was done writing the code. He didn't really care if his code was reviewed. He didn't really care if it was merged. He didn't really care if it was tested and eventually deployed. And, well, I wasn't sure what was going on. Sounds confusing. But in our conversations, I realized it's not that he didn't want to. He couldn't. Now, how does that make sense? Well, you see, it was his personal identity that made it impossible for him. So what was his personal identity? It took me several months to figure it out. It was also the first time I was trying to do this. But he saw himself as the elite coder that sits in front of a computer in a dark room, hoodie up, only light from the screen. Really the Mr. Robot kind of person. And that was the one thing he wanted to be absolutely amazing at. So he wanted to be the best coder ever. And that meant any time that he used on anything other than coding meant he didn't improve as a coder. So now you see, this makes it pretty much impossible, because there is a very clear conflict in identity between what he was doing or what he wanted to be and what we wanted him to be. So where do we go from there? I mean, it's great that I figured it out, but it doesn't help me. Well, that's where the next step comes in. And I'm done with software developer, so POs, it's your turn now. I need to extend his identity. I don't need to turn him into a different person. I don't need to manipulate or anything. No, that is not what I need to do. I need to support the person that is limited by himself or themselves to grow more, to become more, to actually grow more into the ideal that they've set for themselves. And I call this extending a personality. You may call it whatever you want. And I'll make it clear how this happens with an example of a product owner. So it's also the example I brought up earlier. Product owner keeps adding epics and more stuff in progress. And it's difficult to understand what his identity conflict was. I'll give you a very quick explanation of this identity, and that is he saw himself as the person that gets things done. If you go to him and you have any problem, he'll do it. So this is great because there's a lot of that is actually very helpful for product owners in this identity. But it also means that if a stakeholder comes and says, I want this done, I need this done, it's really difficult to say no, because then you are not the person that gets things done. So forcing them to prioritize and say, no, not priority, kind of incompatible. So what I did after 1 or 2 tries and feedback, and saw that it didn't work, and after identifying this identity, I built up pride. Yes, pride, the thing where you're proud of yourself. And there are things to be proud, even if the epic work in progress thingy didn't work out. But in the end, I identified his strengths, identified the overlap with the role he was supposed to be taking, and gave him positive feedback about it. Therefore, built pride. Goes something like this. You're really good at breaking down epics, describing them, breaking them down into user stories, describing those user stories. You're really good at working with developers, talking with them, communicating with them. You just find this right level of technical understanding on your part, but not getting involved too deeply. You're really good at managing those levels. And you really have good communication with the stakeholders. And you talk with them very naturally. And that is great. So that is what I did. There's one thing I didn't do. I did not criticize him or talk about the work in progress limit on epics that he was unable to keep. Because I do not want him to build an identity of not being able to do it. So I don't know, maybe you have a relatable example in your lives. I was told in school I was lazy. I was told that 10 years, it took me a very long time to get rid of that. Just saying. So do not build, unless you can help it, a negative identity. So this is where strengthening strengths comes in. And I didn't make any of those up. He deserved that positive feedback. He really deserved it. And over time, he became more proud of himself. Again, deservedly so. Once he had that pride built, now this is where I can extend the identity. Because this is then where I can start conversations around things. Like, you know, you're a really good PO. You know that you're a really good PO. You know that you're really good at doing all those things. You know right now there's one thing you're not doing, and that is help stakeholders prioritize their own needs and help them clarify those priorities with the other stakeholders. So I didn't go directly into you suck at work in progress limits. I connected the request with his identity, with what he wanted to do. He wanted to be the person that helps the stakeholders. So this is how I can extend the personality, because pride makes him do it. Because if he doesn't, it's difficult to be proud of yourself. How much sense am I making? Can I get some nods or shakes? Nice. This is also where peer accountability can start. So the product owner started influencing the stakeholders. And the art of peer accountability is influencing other people, preferably of your peer group or level. So if we're thinking of a hierarchy, stakeholder and product owner are often not that far apart. But I'll bring in one more step before I really go into peer accountability. And that is, you can do one more thing with this loop. Now it's starting to look like a loop. And that is, you can build a team identity that works just the same way. And where you can have people influence each other. So up to this date, one of my favorite teams that I've worked with had amazing collaboration. And they were really proud of how they collaborated. And they got things done, so there's other things to back it up that they were a great team. But one issue we had after building up pride in them, in their team identity, that they're a great team, was when I asked the question, is your code great? The answer was yes. Is the product great? The answer was no. So why? Well, they're not the only team working on the product. So what they needed to do in order to become proud of the product that they were creating was start influencing other teams, which is what they did. One of the proudest moments of my Scrum Master career. And they went out proselytizing, and it even went so far that they invited a technical leadership person that was very strongly against pair programming or even mob programming especially. That's a complete waste of time, very inefficient, you don't get things done, so don't bother and stop this immediately. Well, they invited him to shadow them for 2 weeks, and there was a feedback session afterwards where he started like this, and my team just demolished him. They had the data to back it up that their way of collaboration was just superior to anyone else's way of working in the company. And they were incredibly nice about it. There was nowhere where he could have found a way to counter their arguments. Yeah, it made me so proud. But this is a team that, through pride in their own work, went out to influence the rest of the company. That technical team lead never ever criticized anyone ever again for pair programming. Never brought it up again, ever. This can only be done by the people actually doing the work. I could have talked hours and hours and hours. No effect. The team did it because they were technical peers to him. Yes, he was higher in the hierarchy, but skill-wise, they were peers. So you see, this is, wrong direction. This is where peer accountability really comes in. And I'll give one more example of this within a team this time, and that is with a QA. So another team that I was working with had good collaboration. It's just that one person in the team was not at the same level. They didn't have the same level of commitment. It was the QA. So they didn't really want to get involved in doing refinements. They didn't want to get involved in breaking down things. They wanted to be told what to test it, be done with it. I mean, fair enough. But as a company and as a team, we wanted more. And we wanted them to be more. And while the team discussed this a couple times with me, and I also had my individual sessions with the QA, in the end, what really changed things was the conversation that the team had with the QA on their own. We like you. We respect you. We want you here, but we need more of you. We need more of you. We need your involvement earlier, and we know you can do it. We know you can. And the things you'll be struggling with, we're here to support you. We'll get you involved, but we need you to step up. And this is now in a team of peers. Yes, slight role differences, but they're all a Scrum team. This is 4 people telling one person, we believe in you, you can step up, we'll support you doing it, but you need to do it. This has a vastly different impact than me going to the line manager of the QA and tell the line manager, tell the QA to do more. Yeah, that's going to work out fantastically. So this is peer accountability. It's not pressure through the hierarchy. And if you've noticed, or maybe you can guess at this, there is one more difference between peer accountability and pressure through the hierarchy, and that is resentment. Ooh, big word. When you tell people what to do, when you force people what to do, it might conflict with their identity. And when you force people to do something that goes against who they are, well, guess what? They'll resent you. With good reason. In my point of view, at least. So, when the same thing comes from peers who believe in you, it's a vastly different experience. And this peer accountability leads, therefore, into a loop of an extended identity, in my example of the QA, and creates a high-performing team. Because people hold each other accountable to the highest standards. Collaboration, where, one more software developer thingy, sorry. Where developers really hold each other accountable for coding standards. Really demand of each other. Barely matching what we wanted isn't good enough. We want to be better. We want perfect. We want great quality. We don't want just meeting the definition of done. No, we have higher standards than a company-wide definition of done. We demand more. And when someone does not, pride in who they are and what their product is, what they're proud of, which goes beyond their own influence, demands that they speak up. If you're proud of your product, great. But if you're only proud of the part that you've contributed, it's not good enough. Product might still be bad. I think we've all seen some of those. But if we all hold each other accountable, this is where greatness lies. So now the identity extends and forms a loop, a self-reinforcing loop. Kind of like a spiral, but that's difficult to put on. one thing will lead to another, but the really difficult thing is that it all starts with the personal identity, trying to really understand who is the person that I'm working with. How do they see themselves? How does that overlap with the role they're kind of supposed to be taking? And then the question, how can I get them to be more? So for those of you with some form of coaching training, goes pretty much into that same direction. It's helping overcome limitations that people set for themselves but aren't really there. So the identities that I'm trying to extend aren't something that I want to force upon them. No, that would be manipulation, and I do not endorse that. But it is in the conversation, really listening to what they see, to what they want to be, and helping them see more. And then trying to build up that pride will take time. Understanding will take time. Building that pride will take time. And for the software developer I mentioned in the beginning, well, it took me, especially since it was the first time that I really encountered this and I didn't really know what I was doing. It took me, I think, 7-8 months. For the product owner that I mentioned, the whole process of understanding who he was and building up that pride took me around 6 months. Well, one addition to that, after I had that one conversation with him, it only took a few weeks to reduce the epics in progress. Change went very fast after that. And it is sustainable change, because the changes that the people now adopted are part and core of who they are. If you fail with this, if you try to imitate this, what I've been telling you about, and if you fail, I'm pretty confident that the one thing you got wrong was the personal identity. And that is a very difficult thing to really get, because you really have to listen to a person, and listening is damn hard. But if you do, once you get through that, change will happen fast. And just as one counterexample, a different PO that I was working with, I got along with her really great from the start. I kind of immediately understood who she was, and it took me only 2 months, and I started new in this company. And took me a very short amount of time to really get to her and go through this process. And we had very fast, lots of very groundbreaking changes for that company. So it's not always that it takes a long time, but at the same time I want you to not make any false hope, because it can take a very long time. It can take several months. And if you fail, you basically go back to step 1. Like a video game. Which is always something that I wanted to say in a conference.
Dark Souls.
I thought of Super Mario, but yes. Somehow, I got through this faster than I expected. Way. Guess I left something out. Well, it leaves me with one question that I want you to think about. And that is, who are you? What is your identity? I'll take questions.
Just raise your hands.
So it's like a reverse card in Uno. So what's your identity?
That is such a fantastic question, because it allows me to go into a different concept, which is we don't have one identity. We have lots of identities. So this speaker identity that I have right now is, I've seen people struggle with this. I've been struggling with this. I have a solution. It's not the only solution. No illusions there. There are lots of illusions. That as well. There are also lots of illusions. There's lots of ways. But this one brings several things together which I haven't seen anywhere else. So it's based on a lot of principles of other things. So it aligns very well with principles that I got to experience and understand from psychology, from anthropology. It even aligns with karmic traditions, the spiritual traditions, because the concept of duty is very strong of dukkha, if that makes sense for anyone. It's very strongly aligned with what you're proud of, basically. But knowing this shapes my identity of I have to do this. I have to share this.
Hello. So I have one question, because you were telling about putting that on the pride, I have to do this. How do you make sure that that doesn't go into the toxic environment and just go across or against the psychological safety? Because if I have the feeling that I'm proud of it and I have to do it and I cannot do it, then on the other hand, it's like separation inside of me, which can lead to the burnout or anything like that. And also, if you have one team which is a lot of proud in the company, it might happen that they have too high expectation about the other company. So how make sure that everything is like on the same level?
Fantastic question. There is no easy answer that I can give you. I didn't specifically talk about this, but there's basically two things. One is already inside the talk that I gave you, and one is outside. The inside part is the identity. It is really, if it is my identity, I feel responsible for doing it, and I can't not do it. So yes, it can be demanding, but those aren't the things you get burned out from, because they align with your core values, with who you are. So this makes one part easier. Doesn't mean it's not possible to overdo it. It's very possible. This is where other mechanisms have then to come in, of actually respecting other people, respecting other people's privacy, respecting other people as who they are, which is, again, a little bit of the understanding identity part. But if I get along with other people, respect them, like them, which is really what I'm trying to achieve with everyone that I work with, then I'm much more tolerant. Yes, I have some high standards, but I only set standards that I know are achievable, because I achieved them. I can ask similar of others. Yes, yes, yes. It's difficult. Doesn't immediately give you the answer. In the end, as the best agile coach, scrum master answer, it depends.
How do you measure the level of accountability in the team, and how do you recognize when do you need to reiterate the whole process?
One very good thing to establish is team agreements. So if you have expectations, that if the team has expectations of each other, I would recommend that you create formal agreements of this is what we expect, this is what we want to do as a team. So this also helps a little bit with not overdoing it, because you formalize those things. And you can measure against that, would be the first thing that comes to my mind. Honestly, I didn't think too much about this yet. But it's something I want to explore further.
I'm not sure I fully understand the full cycle yet. Could you maybe
Absolutely.
Could you maybe pick up the example with the coder again and explain how it ends up in peer accountability?
So I didn't use the coder example any further because I didn't want to bash coders. So I tried to give every step with a different person, but to give you a very quick rundown with the coder, what kind of happened is I got him into being proud of the product that he created. I got him to see that there's more to being a great coder or to being a great developer, really, than just pure coding. Because even Mr. Robot needs to pay attention to what his code actually does in real life. Will it delete the bank database or not? And once I had that, I extended that again with, well, you're proud of the code you're writing. You not only have to make sure that your code ends up doing something, but your code is surrounded by other people's code. And he became one of the best quality enforcers, let's say. He taught other people how to write better code. He worked with others, with less experienced people, on getting them to a level where they create better code. He felt it upon himself to do this. Does that answer your question?
In this case, you managed to get his identity extended to the whole product and later to the whole team. And then he held himself accountable, actually. So it was not like in the other case that the team told him, hey, we need you for code reviews, like with the QA person. But in this case, he himself became aware of his role in the team.
Yeah. Interesting thing that you kind of noticed there, which I didn't think about. Peer accountability has two sides. The side holding others accountable and the side of being held accountable. And yes, those are different. And I used examples from both sides without giving you a warning.
About the example of the team that evolved to then fight their own battle, I get the triumph in that, but at the same time I feel like shouldn't they also have gone and extended that guy's identity then? Because you said they demolished him. So isn't this kind of a conflict, or does this mean that sometimes proving somebody wrong is also valid? It's not like kind of feeling, but I think you get what I mean.
I feared this question. So it is the one contradiction that I have in my talk. I knew this might be coming. I had hoped it wouldn't. No. But I know the direction of the answer. So yes, the proper way, first of all, demolished was more a satisfaction part on my side, not of the team side, actually, because they respected him. It's just I didn't. So they were actually very nice about it. And yes, they only managed to change him with what they said because he understood their argument. So he experienced there's something more that he needs to learn. So this is not directly extending identity, but it is giving the starting opportunity to do it on for himself. Did I manage? Yeah. Nice.
In the example with the QA person, you talked about peer accountability, but did the team notice the fault by themselves, or was it you that noticed it and introduced it to them? Or how does, so when there is a problem, do you just expect the team to fix it on its own, or how does that work? If you
it's a collaborative process in the end, and it will vary from situation to situation. So in this case, I do have background as a QA myself before getting into a Scrum Master role. So I personally kind of had the expectation of a QA doing more than being just a tester. And this was something that the team before I had joined them didn't really see that as an important thing. They had their tester, and that was what they were used to, so it was fine. But I introduced them to the concept, and once they understood what I was talking about, they wanted more because they saw the benefits. So it also wasn't just me putting it in there and they jumping on it. I had them get involved, the developers get more involved in the refinement process, and through their own experience of contributing to that process and making it better, they experienced the effect that it can have, and they wanted to become even better on the side of quality, which is really how they saw the QA as quality person, and they wanted that input earlier. Shift left.
Do we have any further resources or books that you can recommend for us to dive deeper into the topic?
My favorite book recommendation of all times. One of the best leadership books that I've ever read. And I'm not joking about this. It's not a typical recommendation, but it's also, funnily enough, the one that David Marquet gives. It is How to Talk to Kids so they will listen, and listen to kids so they will talk. Best book about management and leadership I've ever read. This will also teach you how to understand identity and help people build their own identity. Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff around identity, and there are different models to that. Is there any model that you can recommend?
There are different. I use several. So the way I got into... There's too many good ones to list. They all have their advantages and drawbacks, and it's a very situational thing in my point of view. So one thing that I very regularly use is comes from a spiritual tradition of Buddhism and Hinduism, the model of the mind, which helps you understand personality and identity as well, but disconnected from actual personality traits. it's just very helpful to understand how things happen. And other than that, well, in my coaching training, I got to know the Enneagram, and yes, it's not very scientifically valid, but it's not about being scientifically valid oftentimes. It is about being useful. It gives you a starting point to try to understand. So it's not a personality diagnosis or anything, and you shouldn't be using it as that. But anything that gives you an into trying to understand and connecting dots. Doesn't really matter which model you use, it will get you there. But only if you then listen and actually also ask the person, which is something you're allowed to do. Are you this kind of person? Am I seeing this right? Unless you're really offensive with it, that's a fair question.
One last question.
Did you ever reach your breaking point with somebody? If, for example, the base identity and everything extended was really, really toxic. So what was your breaking point there, or when would you recommend to not continue?
Yes. Yes, I had my breaking point. There were some breaking points, but there's a very specific cause for that breaking point, and that is initial respect. And I didn't have it, which meant I couldn't be understanding and influencing and helping them understand, because they would not respect anything I said. This came into my life, usually through a difference in hierarchy. Most of the times.
Okay, I was a bad time cop, sorry for that. A big round of applause for Arnold.